We begin with some new details about what will be in tomorrow's federal budget.
Okay, c'est parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Today, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland continued the very Canadian tradition of selecting a new pair of shoes ahead of the budget. The annual spending plan is usually shrouded in secrecy, but the Liberal government spent the last couple of weeks rolling out the key planks largely related to housing. I'm joined now for more details by my colleagues, Radio-Canada's Parliamentary Bureau Chief Louis Blouin and the CBC's Karina Roman. Good to see you both.
Hey.
Hi.
So, Louis, you guys have a story up this morning on Radio-Canada about tax increases coming in this budget tomorrow. What are you hearing about that?
We know that the big question tomorrow is the fiscal anchors that the finance minister set last fall. Could she remain committed to that? We know that they have to bring in revenues. So what they are targeting is rich people in Canada. They want to tax some wealthy Canadians more. What we're told is that it's going to be a very small percentage of the Canadian population, less than the 1% that we are talking about. So, and it's not the first time that they've done that. You know, last year they raised the minimum tax that limits the tax advantages you can get when you file your tax return. So they could go that way. They could go the way of taxing more capital gains. That could be another option, or maybe simply having a new bracket of imposition. So we will see the details for that tomorrow. We are also hearing that the Liberals want to make some fiscal changes for big businesses in Canada,
right.
To bring in also more revenues. So could it go as far as what the NDP is asking, this tax on excessive profits of oil companies, big grocery chains in Canada? The signal that we receive is that they're not necessarily ready to go there, but we will see how far they go, because they have a balancing act to do there. They don't want to be counterproductive and, just push away investment in Canada at a time where, growth is kind of not what we hope for. So it's going to be a delicate exercise tomorrow, what they're doing.
Right.
But they want to send the signal that they want to bring in more money.
Right. So after the weeks of the spending announcements, it's targeting the 1% richest of Canadians in some form or another, either capital gains, stock options, alternative minimum tax, or a new tax bracket. We don't know which. Yep. And on the corporate side, something, but maybe not the windfall tax or a base increase. Yep. What about the digital services tax? Louis, this is something they want to bring in for the big tech companies. They've announced it, legislated it, but they've never put it into force.
Exactly.
Do we know what's happening there?
We asked, could it be that? Because we were wondering, because this could be an option to get in more revenues. What we were told in the background is that it's already announced. Maybe we're going to get some details about how it's implemented, but it's not the news we're looking for.
Okay.
So we'll see.
All right. So, Karina, Louis talked about a balancing act that needs to be done here, on the ledger between, expenses and revenues. But also there's this balancing act the federal government has with the budget, and how the Bank of Canada feels about this budget as they're trying to get to a sustainable low interest rate environment and not cause any more rate hikes.
Exactly. Everyone I've talked to has said they have to send a signal of fiscal responsibility. Now, perhaps fiscal responsibility and restraint is in the eye of the beholder, but the Bank of Canada is looking for, are we ready to start lowering rates? And they're only going to be ready to do that if, as Chrystia Freeland has said many times, they don't pour more fuel on the fire. Mm-hmm. So you've got all these spending announcements, although they say, $38 billion that we've heard so far, but $17 billion of that being a loans program. So it's not, it has to be taken into account. Still, it's a lot of money. So will that be seen as restraint? What more will we see tomorrow? How will they pay for it? All of that is setting a signal to lower those rates. And why is that important? Well, obviously, Canadians would like to see lower rates. Mm-hmm. But politically, really, if the Liberals want to not further fall in the polls, they'd like to see those rates go down too, because that will only help, not hurt, their political fortunes as well. So that's the balancing act they're also doing. They want to, help people and make life more affordable and all of that, and deal with these cost of living crises, but they also don't want to make it worse by causing inflation to go up. So they have to tread that line.
Right. It's a balancing act, Karina, but it's definitely not going to be a balanced budget, right? I mean, we know that categorically, because what they're talking about now as a target, as a measure of fiscal restraint, despite all of this new money, it's to sort of keep the deficit at 1% of GDP, sort of below $40 billion as a sign of modesty in terms of spending. With all the money they've done, some of it loans, as you said, how do they do that? I mean, there's not going to be enough on the taxation side, given what Louis has said about it. Like, what kind of a balancing act did they do?
So the other balancing act is, it depends on how immediate all the spending will actually roll out, right? So maybe a lot of it is backloaded. Maybe there's other spending promises, and it's been pointed out to me that there's a number of measures in previous budgets that actually haven't happened yet. So is there a reprofiling? Is there a delay in spending in other priority areas, since everything seems to be a priority with this government, that they then, push the numbers? I mean, what it matters is, to them, I presume, when you're looking at those guardrails to keep the deficit in a certain range, is on paper, what is it going to look like? But what will that mean in reality? So is it deferred spending? Some of the defense spending, a lot of the defense spending is quite deferred. But what other things have they promised in the past that may be now later? Or things are even promising now that people will say, oh, surprise, it's not actually going to happen next year. That would be another way for them to make the numbers work.
I'm curious to see where the Trans Mountain Pipeline plays into the revenue projections. It's coming on stream in May, and that could boost oil prices, so that's obviously a big factor there. But Louis, look, it's been weeks of talking about housing, millennials, and Gen Z, or Gen Z, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I mean, that's who they're targeting in this budget, right? It's younger voters who are angry and disillusioned, and they need them back.
And that's why I think we can call this an electoralist budget. Even if maybe the election is 1 year away, a year and a half, they are targeting young voters that are struggling to get into the housing market, for sure. There's a lot of frustration out there. And it's been showed by a lot of young people going to Pierre Poilievre. The poll shows it in the 18 to 35-year-olds bracket. People are very, very worried. So it's the thematic that is coming out of all this, and the Prime Minister repeated it today. He's fighting about fairness between generations. So that's the big message you're going to hear tomorrow. But the thing is, we've seen all this buffet in the last 2 weeks. Tomorrow we're going to see the bill. So, and the thing is, for me, is that is it being fair for the next generation if the next generation is footing the bill? So I think they have to send a signal that they're trying to control their spending, but also that they are listening to what's happening on the ground, and that's people not being able to enter the market and are paying too much money for their rent.
Yeah, it's a piece of cake. It's an angry country with big problems that requires big spending, and you need to do that without driving up the deficit and not raising taxes to the point where you choke off the economic recovery. Piece of cake. All right, Karina Roman, Louis Blouin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's bring in the power panel today, though. Rob Russo is the former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief. Brad Levine is a former Communications Director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Gary Keller is a former Chief of Staff to Conservative Cabinet Ministers. Happy Budget Eve, gang. Vandana, it was a rare day. There was no actual pre-budget announcement today. It's like they broke a streak. $38 billion in multi-year commitments, $17 billion of that in loans, but $21 billion in new spending. How are they going to do all of this and not blow past that deficit ceiling they've set for themselves?
Well, I think they definitely have a way to do it. I mean, Minister Freeland has said that she's creating the conditions to make sure that the Bank of Canada can bring down interest rates. I think the government knows that the best thing that will work for them is if the Bank of Canada brings down those rates. So whatever they need to do. But I do think what they're going to look at is they're going to prepare to set up an argument that will work, I think could work for them well for the election, which is investing in Canadians. And they're going to put forward an argument that talks about, here's what we're going to do for you. And you can bet on this. You can bet on a government that has your back, that's going to focus on housing, that's going to focus on healthcare, and the issues that matter to you the most right now in a time of affordability. We are looking at an economy that is affected still by the pandemic, a global war in Ukraine that is affecting not only just Canada, but the U.S. and Europe. So this is happening across the world. But for them to say, here's what we're going to do for you, and to put the question, what do you think the opposition will do for you? So I think that'll work for them.
Well, Gary, my colleagues at Radio Canada and others have been speculating, and they're reporting it today, that there are going to be tax increases in this budget tomorrow to help balance things out, aimed at the wealthiest of Canadians and in some way at corporate Canada, though we're unclear as exactly what that will look like. What are your expectations on there?
Well, it's interesting the clip you just played there, because I think there was something for everybody in that messaging. So you had, the government talking about their announcements to date. You had Mr. Poilievre talking about the impact of the rising interest rates and government spending. He's always talked about, lower government spending, lower interest. It'll be better in your pocketbook. And then Mr. Singh talking about corporate greed, which is again in line with his message. But the things that the Liberals have been talking about for the last 2 weeks and we'll be talking about tomorrow, Mr. Poilievre has been talking about for 8, 9, 10, 12 months. And the question will be, I think, for a lot of voters, to Vandana's point, is, okay, you say you're there for us now. Where were you for the last year when things got completely out of control? And sure, the government can make all sorts of arguments about interest rates and what have you, but Mr. Poilievre goes right to his key argument about government spending. Got to get government spending down, pay less interest, more for programs. And so I think there is some messaging for everybody, no matter how you look at it.
But Brad, you know, the balance sheet, the Bank of Canada, the bond raters are going to be less interested in messaging and more interested in the bottom line, right? So Chrystia Freeland is saying fiscal restraint, productivity growth, and addressing affordability and housing are all the core targets of their last or second last budget before the election, depending on when it is. I mean, how does she strike that balance and like nod to all the problems that need to be addressed and nod to all the demands that their confidence and supply partner are putting on the table?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is where the spending is going to go. And that's a tough message because there's many priorities. And when you have many priorities, it's hard to grab the attention of the country who will be tuning in for tomorrow's budget and the day or two afterwards to say, what is the storyline here? I think every budget has to have a very tight message. Is this a housing budget? Is this a budget for slow economic times, which I think many are predicting? I'm not rooting for it, but that's certainly what the experts are calling for. So the only thing left to really talk about is how is she going to pay for it? And you know, to your setup there, I think, you know, corporate income taxes. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw corporate income taxes addressed by either an increase to the corporate income tax itself, or maybe a narrow cast of a windfall profits tax. While many Canadians are struggling with high costs, whether it's food or housing, some of our companies in this country have done very well and are making record profits. So the question is, will they be called upon to play a role in how to offset some of this program spending? And then, of course, in the weeks and months to come, what are the reactions from the bond raters and the Bank of Canada on all that? If the Bank of Canada does bring down interest rates, that'll be good news for the incumbent government federally, because that will relieve a lot of Canadians who are paying much more for their mortgages today than they were just a couple of years ago. So the runway isn't long. This is, as you say, this is either the second or, you know, or the last budget that at least be fully at least implemented before the next federal election. Not a lot of time to get those programs into the hands of Canadians, so that then the election question becomes, do you like these programs, or will Pierre Poilievre take them away? That's a ballot question right now at this early stage within the election cycle.
You know, Rob, when you were my boss here as the bureau chief at the CBC, the day before the budget, you'd be ordering us to make phone calls and find out what's going to be in this thing. Hard to do that this year when they've announced everything for weeks in advance running up to it. But, you know, we are getting reporting that there's going to be some sort of tax measures in the budget tomorrow. I mean, how do you think this narrative could all play out based on what they've rolled out so far and the blanks they're going to fill in tomorrow?
Given what they're going to spend, and given what Minister Freeland has said about sticking to deficits and sticking to, I think they call them anchors again. They were guardrails for a while after they were anchors, and now they're anchors again.
Anchors away.
Note that they never really hit. They never really hit any of their targets, but they're going to have to inflict some pain. And how do you do that if you're a government a year away from an election? How do you inflict pain? I think we're about to find out that populism isn't just the preserve of the right in Canada. It can also be used on the left. I think we're going to see them go after people who are very wealthy. It could be everything from one percenters, or it could be there's about to be a huge transfer. It's already started, of wealth from baby boomers to their kids. If you could pick an arbitrary number like 5 million, you might want to get a slice of that for everything over 5 million. It's not a lot of money, probably, but it sends a signal that that you're going after people who have a lot of money, and it might be popular as well. I don't know. I couldn't get back into Ottawa because there was a line of Brinks trucks going down Bank Street. I thought that was because you were cashing out there, David.
Yeah. No, I return my empties. Look, Vandana, I wonder about this. Like Rob talks about populism not just being the domain of the right. And if you go back to the 2015 campaign, when the Liberals talked about class, they did well. When they talk about values, they don't do as well. Is this a shift back to a class-based argument if they're going after wealthy Canadians through the tax system? Sort of like the first thing we did, Justin Trudeau used to say, it was cut taxes for the middle class and raise them on the 1%.
Yeah, that was the most popular policy that we put out. I remember I went on my honeymoon 3 weeks after the election, and it's what Canadians were talking about. It's the only thing they remembered. So I do think the government does know that when they talk about values, it doesn't always connect with people the same way. But talking about things that affect people in a more tangible way will work. And I think for most people, being the 1%, or if you're like a corporate person in Loblaws, you think, you know what, I can't get that ahead. I think most people that in my cohort, which are millennials, think that I work hard, I do my job, I pay my bills, but I cannot seem to save enough. But then there's a whole slot of people that seem to be able to get ahead. And not to, I don't want to, there's nothing wrong to do well. Whether you work hard, your industry, you have intergenerational wealth, there's a number of reasons to, but I think it connects to pocketbook issues that affect Canadians where like, okay, you're not hurting me, you're gonna provide me with healthcare, with housing, you're gonna give an environmental plan, but you're going to go to whatever, if it is a tax hike for corporations with 1%, right, that's not gonna affect the average middle class Canadian. And I do think for people of a certain segment, the ones that they're after, the middle class, Gen Z, and for millennials, that is something that will be quite interesting for them.
So Gary, there's a challenge here for the government, right? In that the economy, while slow, has done better than some of the doomsday scenarios that we were all hearing coming out of. The recession is coming, it's evident. It feels like a soft landing. It has been achieved or is likely, though it's very flat. I'm not saying it's happy times, but it's not, multiple quarters of negative growth, right? Wages have been above inflation for a good chunk of time right now, but people aren't feeling any better off because when you get the wage increase, you want to have the buying power that goes with it, and people aren't getting that. So they've told everyone what's in the budget. They need to make everyone feel what's in the budget, and that is a difficult thing for our government to do at this stage.
And I think that's why Mr. Poilievre has been so successful to date. He has been representing back to people the exact feeling that they have been feeling. I attended one of his rallies about 3 weeks ago here in Ottawa, just in the back of the room, just to watch the crowd. First of all, I was struck by a few things. One was the number of people who I've never seen before at a Conservative rally in Ottawa, the number of young people, the number of diverse people, just people who had never been to a political event before and were clearly enthused by the messages he was on, talking about it doesn't feel like you're ever getting ahead. And Mr. Poilievre ends all his speeches with that sort of imagery, the family that is finally at home, the kids playing road hockey on the street, the seniors planting flowers at the cenotaph, but the young family who are sitting on their front steps saying, we're home finally. And if people can't feel like they can afford that core thing, which is a house or an apartment or some sort of a shelter, that is going to continue to dog the government all the way through until the next election.
Well, Brad, on that, we saw, we released on Friday a pretty comprehensive pulling together of a housing plan. That's not my assessment of it. That's the assessment from the people who work in that particular space, saying what you have there is essentially a collection of a lot of the best ideas that a lot of the people who have been thinking about this for a long time have been putting out there. And it's funded. It just needs cooperation and help from the provincial and municipal governments. And the provincial governments, that's a work in progress, I think it's safe to say. But all of that's going to take some time. So how do you make this land beyond a better communication strategy, as people seem to think this year? They've got to start feeling it in their bones, in their wallets, and in their homes for this to matter.
Well, that's why, in some respects, there's not enough time for all of that housing to get built. These are multi-year plans. We don't have the supplies, we don't have the labor, we don't have the plans in place to build everything before the next federal election. So, again, that's why the interest rate in June, whether those come down or not, we have a significant portion of mortgage holders who are renegotiating in the upcoming months. If there's not relief for them, they're going to be in a very, I think, foul mood. So it doesn't matter if they see construction going on everywhere. It's not affecting them per se. And unless people are moving from rental housing on the housing continuum into first-time home buying capacity, unless they're moving, they're not going to feel it in their bones. So this really comes down to the story that you're telling. I mean, I don't want to place everything on Commons, because I do believe that there is a bundle of programs there that the some of the best and brightest in the country put together, and the government seems to have adopted those plans. We can argue that it's far too late, and I would certainly be part of that. But the story that has to come out of this budget has to be that there is a plan in place and that things are about to get better. To Gary's point about, like, Poilievre is winning not on ideas, he's winning on story. His story is far more powerful, tapping into far more Canadians than Trudeau's or Singh's storyline. So if he's got the better policy, then the only thing that's left really is the story that he's got to tell, and he's only got about 12 to 18 months to tell it in a compelling way, to grab those people and say there is a game plan, and I am your best hope for a better future in the upcoming mandate, as opposed to Mr. Poilievre.
Okay, but Rob, just on that, the story that's being told, the storyteller has not been the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister. It's been Sean Fraser. It's almost like this is his budget in a big way, at least on the spending side, measures that are at the centerpiece of the narrative they're pitching.
And I think everybody will acknowledge that he's an excellent communicator. So I don't think that's any accident at all. I think if you ask Liberals, though, the problem is the Prime Minister, that he continues to have very little capital on which to draw on when he's trying to sell these ideas. And I'm with Brad as well. I think hope is what's required. This budget needs to signal hope. And I think they need to probably go beyond what's in the budget now. If people in that sort of 30 to 45 category who are looking to buy a home, looking to get out of their apartment, looking to get out of their condo, are going to go ahead. And there was an interesting study put out today by Mike Moffat, the housing economist. He said upwards of 20% of the cost of a home are taxes and fees. And the federal government has some sway there. I would be interested in seeing if they can reduce taxes and urge other levels of government to do that in a dollar for dollar basis, and see if that lurches down or notches down the cost of a home. I would look for something like that, something beyond what we've heard now, in order to try and tap into some hope.
Yeah, I know in the infrastructure money they put on the table, one of the conditions for getting it is no increase in development fees for 3 years, I believe, for municipalities and provinces to do that. So that's one way they're trying to build new homes. And today we saw the finance minister get some new shoes. Because Chrystia Freeland, she took part in this tradition, a Canadian tradition of getting a new pair of shoes in which to deliver the budget.
Okay. C'est parfait. Merci beaucoup.
So these shoes are from a company founded by Millennial and Gen Z Canadians, two cohorts that are a big focus, really the sole focus of this upcoming budget. So Gary, I want to talk about the politics of this, right? Because there's the story everyone's trying to tell, and there's the storytellers who are trying to tell it. That's your audience, in particular, in a lot of ways, Gen Z, Millennial, and women. The Liberals are underwater with men. It's a gender and generational play. They are. You're not going to disagree with me. I'll come to you right after Gary. But it's a gender and generational play, and is the budget the way you can do this?
It's one of the ways you can do it. I'll just say my favorite budget tradition was John Crosby's mucklucks.
His mucklucks, yeah. That budget didn't go so well.
That budget didn't go so well with an 18 cent a gallon increase on gas. But no, you're absolutely right. It's one step, but to some of the previous comment about the time getting short, it's not 12 to 18 months. They have to start making serious inroads now, between now and June, so that by the time they hit the barbecue summit circuit this summer, they are continuing to eat away at those leads. Mr. Poilievre has had between a 10 and 20 point lead. Every single poll, doesn't matter who's doing it, what's doing it, since July of last year. And that signals like these numbers are baked in. And so how do you reverse that? Well, you got to start somewhere. And I think obviously budget day is one way to do that, which is why they chose a different method of rolling out the announcements. It's different. We saw Danielle Smith do a little bit of the same thing in Alberta. She bought time on primetime TV to announce some budget measures. But you got to start somewhere. But like 12 to 18 months, way too late. They've got to start seeing some numbers movement May, June before trying something else.
So Vandana, your arms are not wide when I said they're underwater with male voters, but it is a reality right now for the Liberal Party. So what do you make of this acute focus on Gen MZ, as they're calling them internally? I understand in the shorthand of government, the millennials and the Gen Zs.
I was putting my hands up because you covered all my themes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scoop you.
That's okay. I think what Gary said earlier was right. I think Pierre Poilievre's done a really good job in connecting with that generation, mainly because he's talking about the issues they care about on housing. On this is a generation that isn't going to go work in some place in corporate Canada and work for their pension for their life. They're looking at the gig economy, they're looking at so many different things. So, and they want to live where they want to live, whether that's Mississauga, whether it's somewhere else, but they don't want to be, have to be well, I can only rent or I can only live over here. They want to have the same life that maybe their parents have, should they wish. And I think the focus on that is going to be really important. But the Prime Minister, from the beginning, in 2015, I remember when we were in opposition, his main focus was on youth. And those youth are older now, right? And I think we need to also understand that there's a next generation that hasn't been connected with the Prime Minister, and they've only known him as the establishment, whereas before he was the anti-establishment, right? So I think it's about reconnecting with that grouping. I think that's why you have millennials. I think Sean's about my age. To send that message, and I think someone who can connect with them, who's relatable to them, will be helpful. But that is one of the biggest voting blocks right now. Yeah. And millennials they're not as young as they used to be. They tend to be. They have partners, they have children, they want a home, but you also have to go to the next generation, the Gen Z. And what Rob said was right. They want hope. They don't want to hear negative. They don't want to be. Cynicism can be exhausting. So where can they bet on that can give them the future that they want and can understand the future in the lens in which they see it?
Right. So Brad, here we are, a couple of Gen Xers sidelined again in another federal budget.
Love you guys.
Yeah. But Brad, on that, giving hope is one thing, but you have to draw the contrast with the guy who's been given hope by harnessing the anger, right? And I don't say that pejoratively, it's just what has happened. We haven't seen in-depth policy solutions from Mr. Poilievre yet on the number of issues he's talked about. There have been a few things about really leveraging the municipalities to do what he feels they should be doing. How do you draw that contrast in an aggressive way that you need to do with an election cycle coming without feeding into the cynicism that Vandana is talking about when you're trying to offer that message of hope? Because when your negatives are high, like they are, you need to bring the other guy down if you can't really bring yourself up.
Yeah, especially if you've made the decision that you're going to be leading your party into the next election campaign. There comes a point in the cycle when you're so far along. This is now, it's been, 9 years. He's going to be coming up to 9 years. That's hard for any politician in this country at the federal level, even at the provincial level. And I know from my own experience, when you're in a government that's very unpopular, then you've been in power for a long time, it's really hard to change the channel, even if you've got the contrast. But so the question is, will anybody be listening? Do people want to listen? This is why the Minister of Housing is the lead on the policy and not the Prime Minister, because I think a lot of people are tuning Trudeau out. They don't want to hear him anymore. So that's a real problem. So you either change a leader or you punt the policy lead and the story lead to others. I don't think Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is the best communicator within this government right now. Fraser certainly, to Rob's point, a very effective communicator. But you can't drag the government up from the housing minister. At least it hasn't been done in history. So the big challenge is anybody listening, and what will it take to change channel? But you need contrast. You need to. So once you pass the budget, or once you've finished your budget day, you got to go out and sell it, and you got to say, we're going to do this. They're going to do that. Our messages of hope. He wants, we want to build up. He wants to tear down. That's not cynical. I think we're going to have to draw the eye over to what the options are. Again, Gary's point is right. I mean, he doesn't have 18 months to turn it around. He's got 18 months before the next election, so he's got to turn it around well before that. But the contrast can't come fast enough. We've been saying on this panel that the Liberals should have been out ages ago. They let Poilievre off scot-free. He had the field to himself. He's defined himself, right? I mean, I take Vandana's point about, if Justin Trudeau can become anti-establishment, that's a hell of a marketing coup. But there's still time to pivot and talk about, now that you've got the policy, tell the story of hope. Go back and say this Poilievre's going to take it all away. Meanwhile, Singh can point to all the things that he's done in this Parliament with his 25 members of Parliament, and he can offer a better option as well. So it won't just be the two of them. Singh's got a role here, and Blanchette in Quebec will also play a role in that crowded market space. But you can't do it without contrast. It might be too late, but there's still time, I think, to at least try close the gap from those 10 to 20 points and make it a fairer fight come fall.
So, but Rob, on the contrast, there's going to be a balancing act of competing interests in this budget, but there's not going to be a balanced budget, and there may not even be a path back to balance. And one of the things that Pierre Poilievre has successfully prosecuted is the idea that federal deficits and federal spending, was in the clip we set this up with, are a reason inflation is high and interest rates are high, even though the inputs into that calculation go far beyond what the federal budget is. Provincial budgets, municipal budgets, global factors, it's a whole bunch of things. Can you battle back on that contrast? If you've still got a deficit there of like $40 billion, this is kind of the ceiling they're planning to stay within. And, you don't control the interest rates, you don't control inflation, but you're being blamed for these things.
I think given the level of despair and distemper out there, there's less concern about deficits than there is about doing something to give people a sense of optimism. And all you have to do is look at conservative governments at Queen's Park and in Quebec to know, they brought in far larger deficits than expected because they know that they have to address the existential threat to their mandates. And that's people's discontent and distemper right now. So although I take Madam Freeland at her word when she says she's going to come in with a deficit no bigger than what she promised at $40 billion. She's going to have to get that money from somewhere else. I'd like to go back, though, and talk about this notion of how much time we have. Everybody's talking about a year and a half. I'm not sure. I think this budget is designed that they could campaign on this budget if they needed to. And I think that we're coming to the end of the confidence and supply agreement. I don't know that there are very many other demands out there that the NDP might have, and I think that we're about to see a declaration that that's over fairly soon.
You think? You think the NDP are ready to walk away from this? I mean, their numbers ain't great,
Yeah. I don't know what else they're getting out of this deal right now. I don't know what fresh demands they may have. I'll be listening for them. I think that they'll probably end up voting for this budget. But then I wonder if the separation, the divorce that is inevitable, all of these parties have to begin to draw lines. The NDP needs to begin to draw lines of distinction, and they got what they got. They can campaign on it. We can debate the merits of it, but they need a divorce. And I think that the Liberals are preparing for that as well. Now, that doesn't mean the government's going to fall. We all know nobody has the balance of power, but it does make things a little less stable than they have been for the last 3 years.
Gary, it seems to me like Tiff Macklin may have a bigger say in the timing of the next election than Justin Trudeau, right? Like what he does in June, what he does in July, and what he does in the months after that, because they need the economy to get better. They need TMX to start changing the equation when it comes to oil prices. They need these housing starts to get going so people can see some hope and the mortgage amortizations to take effect. And they need interest rates to come down, because that's when it all uncoupled for them. When the rates went up, they collapse. If they start to go down, they need an external inflection to change things for them.
It's not the only thing, but it's a major factor, and they need to see interest rates come down over and over and over again. And whether or not that is in the game plan, that seems. Look, I'm expecting one rate decrease. Am I expecting multiple rate decreases over month to month to month? I don't know about that.
Well, it's not going back to the essentially free money that has existed for the past decade. That's done.
But like, in order for people to see a difference in their monthly mortgage payment, you need to see, quite a few points drop before people will start to see that, which again takes time. To Rob's point about the divorce proceedings, I do think that is inevitable as well. To me, there also may be a window this fall. The big question, though, is have the Liberals been able to narrow the gap? If it's still 10, 20 points, why would you go to an election then? Can you pull the plug yourself like you did the last time in 2021? I think the government gets to do that once. Stephen Harper tried in 2008. He didn't get his majority. Justin Trudeau tried in 2021. He didn't get his majority. So I think you need to engineer a crisis, a budget crisis or a confidence crisis to defeat yourself. And then you've got the fall, you go throw in the mix of the US election. And I still maintain that part of the Liberal strategy is, can we tie Donald Trump to Pierre Poilievre as much as possible? It's a risky strategy. David McNaughton, former Canadian ambassador, said this is a very risky, I don't like this, but it is a strategy. So I still think I would be surprised to see those numbers shrink that quickly, which then means you're probably into spring 2025 at the earliest.
So, Vandana, it seems, as tough as times have been, through the peak inflation and interest rate hikes of the past little while, looking forward, the dynamics do look better for the economy overall and, as such, the government itself. So it seems stretching this out might help change the map a bit for them.
Yeah, I think the government knows that it's been a difficult time for Canadians, and Canadians just need to feel better. They need to feel. I'm not sure if they'll necessarily see how big a change, but if they see a change, they get a bit more money back. They see, grocery stores is not as expensive. I think, and people just generally feel better about the economy. I think they know it's their best bet, and I don't think it's a one or two approach. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think they know they need time to up those numbers. That's why they need a shift in the budget. They want to change that. They want to close that gap. They want to connect. I think they're testing out who their best communicators are on the front bench and who can best connect with Canadians, because the PM will always have his base. But for those who don't want to see him, who else is out there? We have a strong front bench, right? So I think there's that. I think waiting for the economy to get better. I think they really will want to show that they can implement and deliver some of those key components. So getting some housing build, pointing to success stories, and then I think their third, but not a big strategy, maybe a small one, is if, yes, Trump gets elected. I'm not sure that's a comparison tool, but more of a, this is a government that's dealt with him before tool. This is a government that is stable, and you know what you're getting here. So, you can depend on this government and give them a shot.
Brad, I'm not sure if you're doing any marriage counseling in this confidence and supply marriage that Rob was talking about, but what's your sense on this? I mean, Jagmeet Singh is doing something on consumer carbon pricing. I'm not clear what it is, and I don't think we're going to get clarity until after David Eby has his election in British Columbia. But what's your prognosis on how long the supply and confidence agreement might go, and if the budget could affect that?
Well, once this budget passes fully, then there's unlikely to be another motion of confidence until the next budget. So that's a full year from now.
Well, who knows?
No. But
got
it doesn't have to be.
You got a fall economic statement budget bill that'll come forward. So there are triggers there if they want.
Yeah, they're not going to prorogue and have another throne speech. There could be opposition motions that call for the government. We did that a lot in the 7 years between 04 and 11. We did that almost once a month. I think it was a monthly affair. Very tiring for those that were in the trenches. But you could elegantly end and say we've gotten what we wanted to, but now it's time to separate. And then that would free up Singh to go full throttle against the Trudeau and the Liberal government, and kind of take out the sting that Singh has had to wear with an unpopular government. Yet it was the NDP that kept voting for it. Now, other opposition parties have voted for unpopular governments in the past. I mean, my goodness, the Bloc supported Mr. Harper for many years. Mr. Ignatieff supported Mr. Harper for many confidence votes. So you can delink, but it would be, I think, a fundamental mistake to wait so long that between the time that the CASA does finish and the election time, that there's not enough time to separate yourself. You have to calculate, do you have 8 to 12 months between the election and the end of the CASA? That way you get all of the benefits, but then you try to take out the sting in the upcoming election. So something in the near term could be very important.
Rob, just a quick final thought from you, if I can, that no matter what's in this budget tomorrow, there is this trend right now in Western democracies where incumbents are just in trouble, no matter what they do and no matter what the underlying circumstances are. So is this the beginning of a possible path back against what appears to be just a global sentiment right now?
Well, the odds are against historic odds at Canada since Lester Pearson We have tended to toss governments out after 9 or 10 years. So the odds are not with the government. That being said, the government has decided, as we noted last week, to actually come out of its inert state, which is what it was in really for several months during the summer, and get in and get in the game. And what have they done? Well, they've gotten a couple of weeks of free airtime. I'm going to be interested if we're going to. I'm going to be looking for ads. I'm going to be looking for ads after the budget. The Liberal Party has not spent any real money on advertising on television. I can't watch anything. I can't watch a movie. I can't watch a sporting event without a Conservative ad, even from the government of Ontario, which isn't going to the polls for a long, long time. They're telling me how wonderful it is to live in Ontario. They're not partisan ads, but those guys are spending money on ads. Are we going to see the Liberal government do the same thing? I'll be watching for that after the budget as well.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break. Let's see if you see a Conservative ad on the other side of this. I want to thank the Power Panel, Rob Russo, Brad Levine, Vandana Cotter, and Gary Keller. Thanks so much, gang.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.